But my name is Kelly Bhatnagar, and I work for the Emily program. But aside from that, first and foremost, I am a mother of a very sensitive little 5-year-old boy named Naren and a 3-year-old daughter named Nia. So they keep me very busy, and when I'm not busy with them, then I'm in this role as a licensed clinical psychologist. So the Emily program is a large organization where across the nation we have approximately 8 treatment facilities in Minnesota, 1 opening up in Washington State, and 2 here in the Cleveland area. Unfortunately, not one on the west side, but our outpatient clinic is in Beechwood, and then we do have an adult residential house that's in Cleveland Heights. So I work from our Beechwood clinic, and in that clinic we see adults and adolescents that run the spectrum of eating disorders. And so our youngest that we see there, we've had some 6 and 7-year-olds, unfortunately, and some of our older adults, we've had some adults in the 70s that we've treated as well. We see individuals with anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. We also work with teens primarily and younger adults on promoting positive body image, and we run body image groups there. So my role within the organization is I'm the Director of Research Practice Integration. So I head up all of the research for our organization. I see some of our adolescent patients, and I oversee the program development and oversee the Beechwood Clinic and the services that we offer there. I'm also on faculty at Case Western Reserve University, which is also my alma mater, and certified in family-based treatment, which is the research evidence-based treatment for adolescents with eating disorders. So here is a brief overview of what I'll be talking about today and what we kind of planned. That being said, I don't have to stick to this at all. If you all just came armed with questions about body image, about eating disorders, about prevention, about treatment, I am happy to scrap this aside and just go with whatever you need, because I really want this to be helpful. In my bias and in my opinion, there aren't enough talks about eating disorders, and there's not enough outside of what we see in HBO specials and on Lifetime movies, right? Which kind of blow things out of proportion or misrepresent what an actual eating disorder looks like. But what I have planned is to really focus in kind of on the body image piece of eating disorders and give a brief overview of exactly what is body image and describe factors associated with it. I'm going to offer some really practical hands-on tools for being able to promote positive body image in children and in adolescents, share some advice about how to talk about weight and shape with teens. It's a very sensitive area, not just for adolescents, for anyone in our culture, so sharing some tips founded in research about how to talk about that with kids. And then discuss some practical tips for making meal times enjoyable. And then I have to do this because I'm an eating disorder psychologist. I'm going to jump in and provide some recommendations on what you do if you suspect, even just have a little bit of suspicion that your child may be suffering from an eating disorder, okay? But if there's anything else, like I said, that anyone would like to add on, please let me know. All right, to just start off on what is body image. So when you think of the term body image as it relates to kids and adolescents, what comes to your mind? What do you think of when you hear that term? Not all kids who suffer from negative body image will develop an eating disorder. However, a vast majority of kids who have an eating disorder also suffer from poor body image. It's one of the hallmark symptoms of some of the eating disorders that kids can get. So there are a lot of negative things, which I'll talk about a little bit later, associated with having poor self-esteem and a negative body image. And that's why this is something we should be talking about, and we should be encouraging schools to talk about and offer workshops to be able to promote a positive sense of self in kids and adolescents. All right, so what is body image? Let's break it down. Okay, and I use a lot of corny clip art in my presentations. I'm going to apologize now, this one in particular, because I've always wanted my son to be able to do that. I find a way to slip into every talk, so that's what that's all about. So what's interesting is when I ask that, I talk a lot to schools and I talk a lot to teens, and whenever I ask that question, what is body image, the number one answer that I get is, well, it's what I look like, And what you look like is just one tiny aspect of body image. Like the room full of adults just named, what it really is more so what we think about ourselves, the beliefs, the thoughts that we have about ourselves. It's really a little mental picture or an internalized representation that we have of ourselves. Now, that representation can be accurate for some people, and for some people it can be grossly inaccurate at the same time too. right? There's a level of subjectivity to our thinking, to our thoughts, that help form and that help adapt that picture that we hold of ourselves in our mind. So not everybody's picture is completely accurate. So there are three components related to body image. The first one is just generally, what do you believe about your appearance? What are those ingrained core beliefs, those thoughts, those cognitions that you hold about yourself and possibly believe to be true, whether or not there is evidence or data to support it? Also, two, what's your emotional experience surrounding your appearance? When you look in the mirror, does that promote positive emotion? Does it promote just neutrality? You don't think of it one way or another? Or does it promote sadness, shame, embarrassment, negativity? So the different feelings and emotional responses that we have about our bodies will also tie into body image. And then just generally the sense of control that we have of our body during movement and during other activities really plays into what body image is. All right, so the National Eating Disorders Association, which is a group of researchers, clinicians, advocates, prevention specialists, so they came together and kind of came up with a definition of what they believe positive versus negative body image is, okay? So they define positive body image as having a clear, true perception of one's shape. So what you see in the mirror, what you see in photos tends to be pretty accurate. I mean, our mind does, our brains are just brilliant, and they do a lot of just adjusting on their own. But for the most part, it's pretty accurate for what you see. But not only is it accurate with what you see, but you at times can appreciate and celebrate one's unique shape. So you can find something about whether you're happy with the whole picture all the time, you can find something that you can feel positively about with your body. Positive body image is understanding that appearance means nothing about one's personal character and doesn't mean anything about their values or their morals or their value as a human being. So being able to understand that their character and their sense of personality and sense of self is separate from their body is positive body image. Being able to be proud and accepting of the unique body features and natural shape, and refusing to spend a ton of time focusing in on calories, food, weight, shape, which is really hard to do in an obesity-focused culture where there's a lot of emphasis on losing weight, and having a healthy BMI and all of that. But then finally, just being able to feel comfortable and confident in one's body the majority of the time. Now, nobody, has positive body image all the time. If someone comes every day saying, I love my body, my body's the best thing ever, then we're going to be a little bit more worried about narcissism or things like that, But for the majority of the time, someone shows these signs. So negative body image, on the other hand, as defined by Nita, is to kind of have a distorted perception of shape. And I mentioned in pictures, particularly with teens and adolescents, looking at a picture, you could say, oh, honey, you look adorable in this picture. Look at your homecoming picture. I love this one. Can I put it on the wall? No, Mom or Dad, I hate this. I look terrible in it. Do you see my right toe sticking out? Or, look at my thighs in it. And you may not be able to see what your teen sees. Their friends may not be able to see what they see, but that's kind of what they're focusing in on all the time, to the point that they may not be able to find a picture or want to post pictures or share pictures of themselves anymore. Holding a belief that only other people can be attractive. So this is something that we hear in our clinic a lot. Well, I think a lot of our teens will say, lots of bodies are nice and can be fine, but not for me. For me, I can only be beautiful if I look a certain way. So a belief that only other people can be attractive is a symptom of negative body image. Associating one's shape and weight with personal failure. I always tell the story with this one. I have an adolescent that I worked with that came in and said, Dr. Kelly, I'm so mad. I failed my science quiz today. And do you know why? It's because I'm 10 pounds overweight. So, sat and listened, tried to do the whole empathic therapist thing, reflective listening and all that. And then as we're kind of teasing it apart and talking about it a little bit more, turns out that homegirl didn't study at all for this test. She was so busy calorie counting and, working out and so hyper-focused on her body, she put no effort whatsoever into studying for this test. However, that's a clear example of someone really associating things that may or may not have anything to do with your poor body with personal failure. So any feelings of shame, self-consciousness, or anxiety about one's shape or weight, and just an overall sense of just feeling discomfort and awkward in your body, maybe a symptom of or a sign of negative body image. Okay, so y'all may be looking at those lists and going, oh no, that was me last Tuesday with the negative body image list, right? And kind of I mentioned earlier, it's a really important point because negative body image actually exists on a spectrum, all right? Again, a symptom of the culture that we live in today, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, is that there's a lot of media pressure to look a certain way, right? We have TV, we have social media telling us that bodies that are beautiful really look one certain way, and that unfortunately not just affects adolescents, but it affects adults, men and women of every ethnic background, every SES status, as a symptom of the culture that we live in. So unfortunately, we have to have this category here at the end of the lower end. It's just general normative discontent. So falling in this end of the spectrum with negative body image just kind of means, well, I woke up, I tried on those new jeans, they don't look as great as they did 2 weeks ago, I may not love it, but you know what, I'm going to get on, I'm going to move about my day and not think about it anymore. So those with kind of this normative discontent kind of fit within normal limits of what we see in our culture of being able to say, I'm not quite happy with something, and I'm not going to let it ruin my day and influence how I interact with others in my life, okay? Then normative discontent, though, can shift into something we call body dissatisfaction. So this is where you're feeling so dissatisfied or so uncomfortable in your body that you may start to do things that you necessarily wouldn't have done in the past. So maybe no longer wearing those favorite jeans anymore, no longer wearing bathing suits when you go to the beach, not hanging around a group of people because you're embarrassed of what you look like, or avoiding certain social scenes because of it. That's when we start to get a little bit more worried when it starts to interfere with your everyday life. And then as body dissatisfaction continues to build, it can shift over into what we term body image disturbance, which is a clinical term, okay? And in body image disturbance, this is what we see that's related with eating disorders. So not only is it having you avoid certain situations and kind of ruining your day, but you also at this point may start to engage in maladaptive or unhealthy eating or weight management practices in order to feel better about yourself, which by the way doesn't really work. It's not an effective way of learning how to feel better about yourself. So when we're talking about body image issues with eating disorders, a lot of it is surrounded in this final category of body image disturbance. Does all that make sense? Okay, great. All right, so how does body image disturbance develop? A lot of it has to do with media pressure, okay? And I really want to separate this. This is not how do eating disorders develop, because that's a whole nother ball game there. But this component of eating disorders, body image disturbance, a lot of it is related to media pressure. There is on TV right now and in social media and magazines this portrayal and almost glorification and this sensationalization of an unrealistic thin ideal. So to look a certain way, your BMI has to be, you have to have a certain amount of body fat and you have to have a certain BMI. And so we have lots of groups, the health, beauty industry, the fitness industry. These are multi-billion-dollar industries, okay? They make a lot of money, and they do so by perpetuating this idea of normative discontent, right? So if the health and beauty industry really sets the bar here for what the ideal body looks like, and it doesn't quite match up with the average person in the world, the average person is going to be spending their money on their products to try to achieve this ideal. And then we see times in history where the ideal, the 80s actually is an example of this, where the ideal and the average body type that started to close down a little bit. And guess what the industry did? Raise the bar, right? Because that's the way that the kids will continue spending their money on it. So there's a lot of money to be made by perpetuating, by having people feel less than and feeling not as confident about themselves. And a good example of this is how it's portrayed in TV. So on TV, only 3, and this statistic is actually a couple years old at this point, on TV, only 3% of women are considered to or meet criteria for being quote unquote overweight. That is vastly different than what we see in the actual population. However, also on TV, 32% of females are actually meet criteria for being underweight, which is also very different than what we see in our everyday lives with the people we interact with and walk down the street. But if that's what we're viewing, and especially the teens with these impressionable minds, whose frontal lobes are still developing and all of that, if that's what they're seeing, that becomes their reality. That's what they start to believe is what's normal. So, and also there's just been a clear decline in the size of models over the past 30 years too, which kind of perpetuates this thin ideal. Okay, so this is the current ideal body for women and for men. So I actually just did a presentation at Lakewood High School, and this was one of the most fun activities that I did with adolescents. And I just asked them, I had a dry erase board, and I said, okay, class, tell me, today's ideal body, to be in a magazine as a woman, what do you have to have? What do you have to look like? And any of you having kids, teenagers in particular, what do you think they said for women? What's the ideal current body? Thin, yes. So you have to be thin. Anything else you would think that they would say? Tall. Although I will add, this was a point of debate in the class. So the girls absolutely said to be a model, you have to be tall. You have to be at least 5'7" or 5'8", and they got their data from America's Next Top Model, of course, But so you have to be 5'7" or 5'8". But then the boys in the class jumped in and said, well, yeah, they have to be tall, but not taller than me if I'm going to date them, or not taller than the person that they're modeling with. So on one hand, we heard, okay, so you have to be tall, but at the same time, you have to be able to shrink enough to match up with whatever partner that you're with at the time, okay? So what else do you think the kids might say? I'm going to record it next time. It was fascinating. So you had to have blonde hair, but the blonde hair had to have certain streaks in it. You had to have blue eyes that are big, but your ears and nose can't be too big relative to your eyes. You had to be very thin and toned, but you also had to be curvy at the same time. A small waist, but a really big bottom and hip area. They didn't say big bottom and hip, let me just say that. So there were all of these things. And then I asked the boys in the class the same question. What about men? Well, for the men, you had to be, cut. You had to be muscular, but you had to be a lean muscular. You couldn't be too muscular, You had to have a beard, but not too much beard. It had to be just a very thin layer, You had to have hair, but it had to be evenly kept all the time. Your skin had to be dark, but not too dark. So what I took from this, very interesting exercise, what I've learned from teenagers to date, ideal body image standards are a hot mess of contradictions that continually change over time. So, and even from when I did this talk a couple years ago at that same high school, even the features that they were listing were very, very different in terms of lip size ever since that whole Kylie Jenner lip thing that happened, Then every single class had listed, you had to have plump lips at the same time, which was something that was different from before. Interesting, this year versus 3 years ago. 3 years ago, a thigh gap, are you all familiar with that term? So a thigh gap is something that teenagers talk about regularly where when you stand together, there's a separation between your two thighs. That was very popular in terms of a body type 3-4 years ago. This year when I gave the talk, there was no thigh gap that was on there. Instead, you had to have curvier thighs and bigger thighs, but yet still a little itty bitty waist too. So again, this is what I took from this exercise. I think I learned more about it than they did, but it's a mess of contradictions that really aren't realistic for any one person to meet every single one of those all of the time. Yet that's what our kids are kind of being brainwashed by the media to believe. So, just to give an example, I like to give like a little history lesson to talk about, again, I use this word zeitgeist or spirit of the times, about how ideal body type is influenced by what's going on in our culture and what's happening, and that these standards, what's ideal today, will not be the same 3, 4, 5 more years. And to show a little bit of that, just kind of a changing of the body type for women, unfortunately men, this is the only one that they had, they didn't have one for men yet, but how women's ideal body types have changed throughout history. So I'm just going to show a quick video about that. So,
please refer to the YouTube link that's in the PowerPoint presentation.
Our brief history tutorial of how body types change over time. Let's see if we can get that music off. What's interesting, I always like to bring up, oh, there is that. About the 50s, and where Marilyn Monroe was considered, the iconic beauty, the standard of beauty. If Marilyn Monroe were actually to walk into modeling agencies today, she wouldn't get a contract until she lost about 20 or 30 pounds to kind of match up. And that's kind of our gold standard of beauty that we hold. So a lot of interesting perspective on how what's ideal can shift throughout time. Men even too, so if you notice too, in advertisements and magazines, men are wearing a lot less than what they used to. We used to see these dapper gentlemen, from older movies and things that, it was a lot more about how men dressed. Men were able to look a lot more distinguished. But now, unless you're standing in underwear without your shirt on, showing your abs, you're not quite matching up with that ideal standard of beauty too. So, and interestingly enough, is that we are also too seeing an increase in rates of eating disorders in young men, many more than what we saw in the past, and also too many more boys are also reporting higher levels of body dissatisfaction and body image disturbance than we've seen in a long time. And I don't think it's a coincidence that what we're seeing in the shift in media, that's really focusing in on men as well. Okay, so this is my point for why should we care? Why is this a problem, okay? And you alluded to this earlier, but body image disturbance is actually associated with many things in research, all right? So there have been significant impairments in psychosocial functioning, including Knowles and his group of researchers in the 80s immediately linked up having a negative body image with higher rates of depression. So kids that have a lower self-esteem is tied into this as well. Kids who are feeling poorly about their body are showing more signs of actual clinical depression, and actually there's a recent study that was published too emphasizing that higher rates of suicidality and self-harm related to having a negative body image as well. It's also related to social anxiety. Kind of makes sense, right? If you're not feeling great about your body and not feeling really comfortable, you don't want to go out and meet new people. You don't want to be around other people in the way that you used to. This one really gets the teens when I tell them this, that it can impair sexual functioning as well. Again, to me, that's one intuitively that kind of makes sense. If you're not feeling great about yourself, you're not going to be feeling as comfortable when with partners. And then finally, what was mentioned earlier, high correlations with low self-esteem as well. So, the public service announcement related to body image disturbance and eating disorders, okay? There is a substantial amount of research from diverse areas of psychology. So, clinical psychology, counseling psychology, experimental, social psychology, that really emphasize and recognize the role of body image disturbance in the onset and the maintenance of eating disorders. So, the public service announcement part of this is that I really want to be very clear that body image disturbance alone does not cause an eating disorder, okay? My quick nutshell explanation of what causes an eating disorder is, the best researchers in the field right now are really working hard to try to figure that out. What we know is that it's an interplay of many factors. So there are predisposing factors. So some kids are just genetically and biologically hardwired to develop an illness such as an eating disorder. Same thing with depression, anxiety, cancer, diabetes. There are some people who are just biologically hardwired to be to develop these sorts of illnesses. So those are kind of the predisposing factors. But then there are also onset factors. So once you have that kind of genetic makeup for an eating disorder, some of these factors that stressors in the environment can work to kind of kick those predisposing factors into action. So, for example, this may be a teen who's told by her coach, you need to drop 10 pounds if you want to run varsity on the cross-country team. So not every teen that is told to drop 10 pounds will develop an eating disorder, but those ones with that genetic predisposition, that can be that one stressor or one of many stressors that can kick that gene combination into action. Then on top of it, after you have we call these precipitating factors, when you have those precipitating stressors or factors that occur, there's also something called perpetuating factors. So once a kid is sick, the eating disorders behaviors can be reinforced by hearing from peers, you look so good, you've dropped so much weight. There's also changes in white and gray matter in the brain that actually can be irreversible at times too, but really work then to kind of keep that illness mindset going as well. So it's like the development of an eating disorder is really an interplay of all three of those areas, but body image disturbance is very much linked to being having a role in every single one of those areas, but it doesn't explain the whole picture. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so what we know about body image disturbance and eating disorders, it is the most consistent predictor of the onset of eating disorders. So one of those precipitating factors, one of those things right before the eating disorder comes into play. So it also moderates, or it explains that connection between depression, low self-esteem, and eating disorders. And also too, selfishly for our clinic, it's also associated with poorer response to treatment and higher rates of relapse in eating disorders. So the higher levels of body dissatisfaction, body image disturbance at the beginning of the eating disorder, the harder it is going to be for us to treat. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not treatable, it just means we're going to have to think outside the box a little bit more. We're going to have to be a little bit more creative and really make sure that body image is actually incorporated into the treatment plan so that we're treating that kiddo holistically. All right, time to get practical. You've heard all this, all the public service announcements. Now, what do we do to change? How do I prevent or change, if you're already starting to worry about that in kids or adolescents, negative body image? So 11 tools you can use tomorrow, okay? Honestly, guys, a lot of these are going to be kind of common sense, but these are real tools that we actually use with the kids in our clinics, in our body image groups. And if they can get past kind of the hokey feel of doing some of these tips, it really does start to promote positive body image, or at least neutral body image as well. But the first thing that you can do is encourage your child to appreciate what their body can do, not just what the body looks like, So our bodies, you may not love what your thighs look like today, but guess what? Those thighs got you to your sports practice. They helped you kick that soccer ball and helped you make that goal. Our bodies do a lot of really amazing things that teens tend to forget when they're just focused in on the physical features. So really help them narrow in and think about, what is it that my body can do? How can I appreciate how it got me here today? And it gives them a different way to think about it. Have your child keep a top 10 list of things that they like about themselves. This comes in really handy on those poor body image days, and they'll fight you trying to get to do it, and I don't want to do this. This is corny, but if you can actually get them to do it, and this is where I encourage you to be creative too. So one of my adolescents fought this tooth and nail. No, that's corny. But what she ended up preferring to do is every morning, what her thing was, she would walk into her mirror in the morning, find this one feature that she felt particularly uncomfortable with, and just zero in on it. And then a range of we call them NATs, negative automatic thoughts, just kept coming into her and really bombarding her, which then had the potential to ruin her day. So we knew that the mirror was kind of the precipitator for that. So what she would do is every morning in lipstick, the first thing she would do is she would then write one positive thing that she was going to look at, as opposed to that body part that she wasn't happy with. So for her, she was actually quite satisfied with her eyes. So she wrote on her mirror in lipstick, "You have beautiful eyes." And that was the first thing that she would see, and really helped her to almost kind of retrain her brain to first look at her eyes, this feature she was comfortable with, as opposed to a part of her body that she was less comfortable with. We want to remind our kids, even if it seems as if they're not listening, and they will pretend that they're not listening, remind them often that beauty is subjective. There is a wide range of what can be beautiful. Make sure that you're commenting on beauty that exists across a range of a spectrum, so that you're modeling for them as well. And it helps encourage them to adopt the belief that beauty really does run more than skin deep. Point that out in others as you see it. This person has a really beautiful soul. Can you believe what a great thing that this person did? So really making sure that you're commenting on things that are outside of the norm and the ideal as well. So encourage your child to see him or herself as a whole person. Let them know that they are more than just their calves, and instead of focusing in on that one narrow area, how can you conceptualize yourself as a whole person, inside included? Encourage your child to spend time with peers who are positive and confident. So confidence is contagious amongst adolescents, as is negative body image, particularly from what I hear around homecoming, dance season, prom time. There's that, it's happened when I was in high school too, where you sit around the table. Oh, I hate my arms today. What do you hate? I hate my legs today. What do you hate? I hate my stomach. Oh, your stomach is not as bad as my ears. And it's almost kind of like a contest amongst the circle, So we want to encourage our kids to be the one to step up and go, I'm not going to say anything today. Like, hey guys, instead, let's say something that's either positive, or a lot of teens won't want to do that, but at least just not join into the circle of negativity. And that can go a long way and encourage others. But the more we can help our kids identify peers who do have that confidence and who are feeling great and kind of see themselves as more than just their body, that can be contagious for our kids too. Oops. Okay, and then show your child how to shut down internal dialogue that tells them that there's something wrong with their body. So again, those NATs, N-A-Ts, negative automatic thoughts, will constantly be going, telling them you're not good enough, your body's not good enough, you need to change this. So we can show them how to shut that down there are lots of different tips, stop, look, and listen. Okay, stop that thought mid-track, either distract and do something else, or if your kid is a little bit more psychologically minded, counter that thought. That's what I want you to retrain your brain right now. You just said something negative about your body. Now I want you to say 3 positive things and say it like you mean it. Say it with confidence, so that we can retrain the brain. We want to encourage our kids to wear clothes that are comfortable and make them feel good. I know there are certain fashion trends going on, but not all fashion trends make everybody feel good and feel comfortable, So help your kids find really what is their sense of personal style, their unique style, and how, are the clothes that they're really wearing make them feel comfortable. If our kids are trying to stuff themselves into some, tight skinny jeans just because that's a style, but yet it's making them more self-conscious because all day long they're fidgeting and moving and everything, that's going to have them more hyper-focused on their body throughout the day. So we want to teach our kids how to be critical consumers of the social and media messages and monitor the sites that they're looking at too, okay? So another public service announcement, I have a lot of these, but Thinspiration websites, have you all heard of those? There are actually websites dedicated to promoting eating disorder behaviors in teens. They're called Thinspiration. And on these websites, they'll actually have pictures of really ill men and women, with quotes, that quote that makes me cringe about, nothing tastes better than thin feels and all that kind of stuff, And so these sites can be pretty bad. So just like you monitor anything else in internet safety with our kids, this is the area that most parents don't. It may just look like they're looking at magazine pictures or something like that, but really there are blogs on things that you can to do to lose weight in unhealthy practices. So make sure that you're monitoring what your kids are doing. Ensure your child regularly does nice things for him or herself and for others. That builds positive self-esteem and gives them a sense of not belonging, but a better sense of helping others, altruism. And encourage the message that beauty and health can exist on a spectrum. Not everybody was meant to have a BMI at the 50th percentile. We have diverse body sizes and shapes and all that for a reason, okay? So in no way ever, no matter where you fall on that percentile, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a negative relationship with your body. Most importantly, number 11, and I am sure William Shakespeare meant to say this, to thine own self be nice. Be kind to yourself. So there's a strong body of research too that shows the association between parents' critical judgments of their own bodies and of themselves, and how that affects daughters in particular. Mothers modeling for daughters in particular has a really high association with negative body image and eating disorders and all of that. So our kids hear what we say. Even if we think we're just, coming home and recapping what happened in the Weight Watchers meetings, our kids are listening to everything everything that we're saying and everything that we're doing. So it doesn't mean that you can't make these lifestyle changes for yourself. Of course, more power to you if you are. But be very conscious about how you're talking about your own body, your own dieting behaviors, how you're eating in front of your kids, kind of showing them a wide spectrum of, of foods that they can enjoy as well. Okay, so when it comes to weight, should I even be talking about weight with my kid? So the American Academy of Pediatrics actually wrote a position paper on this, and in a nutshell, the advice was just don't even talk about weight with your kids. And for preschool kids and for younger kids, I could see the rationale. Why make them think about that, particularly at a young age? However, if any of you all have teenagers, do you think that's necessarily realistic for having a teenager? They're talking about weight and shape all day in their health classes and their peers and all of that. So as much as I appreciate the American Academy of Pediatrics position on that, I don't know if that's possible to do in our culture without being naive that these conversations are happening elsewhere in environments where you can't quite control it, So some practical tips, if you have to, if your child, and also too, I was thinking, it could be really invalidating to our kids if a child comes up to you and says, I'm feeling really badly about my body, or I hate my weight, I want to lose weight, and we go, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it, So, and if you have to have these conversations with your kid, here's some practical tips for how to talk about weight with them. So one, you want to be prepared, okay? Don't have a conversation when you're caught off guard and you may say something, that you thought would be helpful but necessarily wouldn't be helpful, but kind of be prepared for the conversation. But think outside of the scale. It's not all about the number. And really, we want to work to kind of take some of the power that we've given to the number on this scale away from our teenagers, okay? We want to normalize for them and validate their experiences. So by normalizing, share, lots of kids and teens have very similar questions like this. I'm so glad that you brought this to me. You're not the only one who's going through this, Let me tell you about a time when I was a teenager and I struggled with this, so that we're not making their experience feel alien to them. But then invalidate. So validate is not, the word validation doesn't just mean to understand or to just kind of parrot back to the kids what they said, but to truly validate a kid, it's to try to find a kernel of truth in what they're saying and then being able to accurately reflect that back to them. So even if it seems completely bogus to you, like you can't stand behind it, doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it, but can you step into their shoes for a minute and have an understanding? Makes sense why you would want to lose weight right now, even though your BMI is 17, all your friends are talking about their dieting, all your friends are trying to lose a size for their prom dress or homecoming tux or something like that. So I could understand why you would be influenced by that. That being said, let's talk about why you may not need to, so having that balance between normalization and validation. Be very clear that your love is not contingent on weight. You will love your child no matter what, they are, what they do, what they look like, and your love is there no matter what. And then finally, too, encourage family behavior changes. If you or your child does need to make some changes, do so in a way that the entire family is involved and it's geared towards overall health as opposed to weight loss or weight management. So this could be starting to take family hikes together, if you want to increase the amount of activity, walks after dinner, finding fun things to do, like go roller skating, ice skate, anything active that you do as a family. I'll tell you, there's nothing more invalidating to teens than being able to say to them, Johnny, you need to go on the diet. Now the rest of us are going to keep eating exactly how we are, and then we know it'll be really hard for you in the moment, but you're going to go on a diet, so here's some rice cakes for your dinner, Instead of kind of calling them out and putting them on the spotlight that way, try to incorporate lifestyles that make it seem as the family is doing something together in support, okay? And increase the number of fun family meals. Now, I just entered the kindergarten world with my son. I had no clue the activities, the back and forth, the birthday parties, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just getting used to this whole new world of school-age kids, and I could totally understand when I talk about have fun family meals. That's a lot easier to do when your kids are a captive audience and don't have a ton of activities to be transported back to. But there's some research also too to show that this really is an important thing to be able to do, because kids and teenagers who do regularly eat meals with their families, doesn't even have to be every day, but regularly eat meals with their families, they actually do better in many different areas. So one, they have better physical health. Two, better mental health, so less depression, less anxiety. Three, they do better in terms of their academic performance. And four, in terms of their peer relationships. They tend to have more positive peer relationships as well. So being able to make time, even if that means cutting one activity a week, or setting aside Sunday afternoons to have family brunch together, is going to be really important in the long run for the kids. So how do you make the family meal times fun? One, make sure the time is designated, it's set aside so that no other things can interfere, and you don't want them to feel rushed, which I know already in our house, a lot of the meals started feeling very rushed because we had to run off to play practice or get my son or my daughter to t-ball practice, but really saying, okay guys, we're going to start dinner early enough that we have the whole 45 minutes to an hour, we kind of have our routine where everybody says, what they're grateful for when telling each other about the day, anything that they're grateful for today. So getting everybody involved and getting everybody dedicated, having time to talk. Although my 3-year-old, the stuff that she comes up with, sometimes I do want to skip her, but you want to create a relaxing ambiance. Sometimes we'll put on music with, a soft jazz station or something, and sometimes we'll burn a candle to just make it extra special. We try hard to have all meals be, not out of cartons, but even if we got takeout or something, on actual plates so that we can be more mindful and thoughtful when we're eating together. Some families like to use this time to play games together. I don't know if you know this, but there are a ton of dinner time games, like little card games and things that you can play to kind of ask each other about, to kind of get to know each other's days and things like that. So look it up online. There's some fun games that you can play during dinner. And then also to model desired behaviors. If you want your kids to eat your vegetables, then you better be eating your vegetables first too, And then also to reward desired behaviors as well. If you see your kid eating their vegetables first, make sure to take the time to praise and to compliment that. I see you ate your vegetables. Great job on that, and then move on. So make sure we're modeling and rewarding different behaviors that we want. Okay, so this is the part that I said I would not be a good eating disorder psychologist if I didn't add the following. And the reason I say this is because I'm not quite sure how much everyone knows about eating disorders in this room, but eating disorders are very, very, very serious illness, okay? So anorexia nervosa has a higher mortality rate than any other form of psychiatric illness. Not only that, the medical complications that come along with not just anorexia, but bulimia, binge eating disorder as well. With our kids, there's the possibility of doing, even early on, some irreversible damage if eating disorders are not caught early and intervened very heavily from the beginning. So I call them the 3 Bs of areas where there's the potential to do irreversible damage, okay? One, in their brains. So some of the cognitions and some of the white and gray matter that I was talking about that can shift and that can change during eating disorder development if kids aren't getting good treatment, and if they're not getting early enough and aggressive treatment, they have the potential to have long-term effects on their cognition and their ability to set shift or move from one activity or another, to pay attention and making decisions. Lots of areas related to executive functioning that can be affected. The second B is bones. If kids especially if they're malnourished, if their weight is not restored in a relatively quickly period of time, they may not reach their full growth potential, and that they could be at a higher risk for osteoporosis and other bone diseases as well. And then finally, the last B, babies. So the reproductive system for both girls and boys, okay? And I know this is not something that our teenagers, hopefully, are thinking about, right now, but, if the more an illness such as anorexia or a kid tends to be malnourished goes on and on, the less likely they can do some long-term damage to their reproductive system by not having regular periods, or for boys, can lower the rate of testosterone level, which will have implications for things later on down the road. So that's why I like to give this what to do if you suspect your kid has an eating disorder, because they are so serious. So one Parents, I will tell you first and foremost, trust your spidey sense. 9.5, I will almost say 10 times out of 10, if you have something just kind of going off in the back of your brain, something doesn't seem right. I see my child losing weight, or I see my child wearing baggier clothes than what they used to. You got to trust your intuition, we get this parent intuition for a reason. So don't, try to put your head in the sand. It never hurts to ask questions. It never hurts to get evaluations. It does hurt to let the illness go on and on without being treated, okay? Next thing you want to do is educate yourself. Read anything and everything that you can. Please make sure it's from a trusted and reliable source. I love the internet, but it is not always accurate. Wikipedia, Google, all that stuff is not always accurate, okay? So you want to find reputable sources, and I have a list of resources at the end of the presentation with different eating disorder websites and organizations where you can get real background information and a sense of what symptoms you should be looking out for, how to read more about it, and all of that. You want to set aside with your kid a time for a private discussion, free from distractions, okay? So have you all ever watched the show on A&E, Intervention, where the entire family sits around and intervenes on the person that's ill? You can try that approach if you want, and I will guarantee that your teenager will get defensive, So maybe as opposed to having siblings and friends and grandparents, maybe it's just parents, or the caregivers or the guardians that actually just sit and to have that initial conversation, and make sure it's not when, your kid has to rush off to baseball practice or to gymnastics practice or right before they're headed to school, because that's a quick way to kind of cut the conversation short before it was meant to. You want to share your concerns using very specific examples, okay? So not just, hey, I'm worried about you, are you okay? It can be, Jane, I've noticed that you're not eating dinner with us anymore. And in fact, I noticed you're wearing baggy clothes and it looks like you're losing weight. Let's talk about what's going on here because I'm really worried. So you name specific examples of things that you're actually seeing and things that you're actually observing when talking to the kids. And also, too, you want to avoid using any accusatory or critical statements. So a big thing, this comes down a little bit later too, but kids don't choose to have eating disorders. It may seem like this kind of stubborn, willful thing, but that's not the case. Living in the brain of a person who has an eating disorder is horrible. It doesn't feel good, okay? And no kids or adults choose to have this illness any more than they would choose to have cancer, diabetes, or anything like that, all right? So, we want to be very careful not to accuse when we're naming these behaviors. Or think of the behaviors that they're engaging in as symptoms of an illness rather than something that they're doing to just annoy you or to be oppositional. We also want to avoid giving simple solutions. So sometimes parents will resort to, well, if you just eat more, then things will be fine. Kids just ate more, then there would be no need for clinics like ours. If it were that simple, then there would be no need for all of this. So it's not as easy as just eat. There's so much more psychologically, emotionally, going on that needs to be addressed as well. So we want to make sure to stay away from these simple solutions, and at the same time, make sure that you're expressing your ongoing, never-ending, continued support. Your kid needs to know, even if they're at this stage, they get evaluated, diagnosed with an eating disorder, starting treatment, even when things get hard, to let them know, I will not give up on you. Kids and adolescents have, compared to adults, I'll be honest, if anorexia in particular it becomes chronic enough that a person suffers from it as an adult, it becomes much more difficult to treat, and there aren't as many good treatment approaches for adults with anorexia. However, if it's not the same with kids, the shorter the duration of illness, the younger the age of onset, the best possible chance we have of them making a full-blown recovery. But, we have to tell, as parents, even when the kids don't have it in them to want to recover, to tell them, well, I have enough hope for you, and you know what, even if you can't do it, I can. So expressing your ongoing support, love, and that you will be there no matter what. And that kind of ties into conveying concern and determination for action. We will do something about this. And then also, too, you've got to immediately share your concerns with your pediatrician. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky one. So I think there are many, many fabulous pediatricians out there, right? And it's a pediatrician's job to be knowledgeable about a little bit of everything. However, if it's something that starts to go outside of the scope of what they've been trained in, and there aren't very intensive training in eating disorders for pediatricians or adolescent medicine docs, then that's not why they refer to specialists. So sometimes we run into an issue where a pediatrician may say, well, your kid's weight is at the 50th percentile now, so I think they're fine. Mom, Dad, back off. You're worrying too much. Not thinking of the fact that this kid historically, without any maladaptive eating behaviors, had always been at the 75th percentile, but over the last month dropped to the 50th percentile. That is a problem. In adolescence, we should see kids staying along their same growth curve trajectory as opposed to falling drastically over a short period of time. So you want to inform your pediatrician, share that you're concerned, ask your pediatrician if they have any recommendations of other people to see to kind of help, or ask for a referral to a specialist. And there are a few in the Cleveland area. So that you can enlist the help of your pediatrician in monitoring as well. And then finally, it's really important to schedule an evaluation with an actual eating disorder specialist. And I would say from a therapy perspective, dietitian perspective, and from a medical perspective as well, okay? We wouldn't send our kids to a pulmonary specialist if they had a heart condition, right? So a generalist, it won't do in this situation. It's really important that they're seeing a specialist. Okay, that was a lot of information thrown at you very quickly, but here's some additional resources. So this book, Shapesville, is actually written for younger kids, all right, from preschool through, I'd say, maybe second or third grade. And it's a book about appreciating bodies at different, it's a cute illustrated little book about appreciating body at different shapes and sizes and colors and all of that. But Brave Girl Eating is a book by Harriet Brown, who's a mother of a child who suffered from an eating disorder, and she kind of talks and chronicles her experience of seeking treatment. If you want some practical skills, things that you can do for a loved one with an eating disorder, Janet Treasure, who's a brilliant psychiatrist in London, works at the Maudsley Hospital in London. She wrote what's called Skills-Based Learning for Caring for a Loved One with an Eating Disorder. And to specifically focus in on body image, Tom Cash actually has the Body Image Workbook, which is meant to be kind of like a self-help workbook that a teen, I always prefer it to pairing it up with therapy for a teen and their therapist to kind of go through together to work on these different body image exercises and things. But it also can be kind of a self-help, but I don't know if I trust a teenager to necessarily do it all by themselves. And some different recommended websites too for more information about eating disorders in general and how to treat eating disorders.